And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Lockie and this is Ryan. And this is a podcast for people who are curious about the world around them and want to learn new things, a bit like us. In this episode, we talk about one of our favourite books that we've read recently, which is called Bad Blood by John Carreyrou.
Yeah, we talk about the star of the show, Elizabeth Holmes, and the company she created, Theranos, and how it's going to tell you everything about your health from the prick of a finger. We talk about Silicon Valley and its darker sides and the cult that surrounds it, and where we have fallen prey to this type of thinking that led this company astray. You can also find more about the author John Carreyrou at John Carreyrou on Twitter, or also his profile on the Wall Street Journal, where he was writing until 2019. We hope you enjoy the episode.
We're back.
We're back. And because we're sitting in between the sort of 6 to 10 range, and we made a rule that within every 5 books we need to have something that's a little less non-fiction, although this is still non-fiction. It's more of a narrative. It's more of a story.
And the book is?
Bad Blood by John Carreyrou.
Wow.
What's the little subtitle to the book, Lockie?
Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. I really enjoyed this book.
I must have missed that subtitle when I first, because I listened to this book, so I probably didn't have the front cover sitting in front of me. Because when I first started listening to this book, I was super pumped. I was like, this is going to be a story about some startup that changes the world and, you know, starts from really humble beginnings and, you know, just goes on to kill it. And I was also thinking, but hang on, I haven't heard of this company. Where is this company? What is this company doing?
See, that would have been an awesome way to find out about it, because it would have been a real roller coaster ride and you could start to see it go bad.
Yeah. And because as the subtitle says, secrets and lies. And that is like the entire premise for the whole book.
And for me, there's so much to take out of this about all sorts of different things, about Silicon Valley and the culture there, around kind of pattern recognition and integrity and management and good and bad and good and evil. It's just a fantastic story.
It's a great story on ethics.
Yeah, that's a better summary, yeah. You could boil it down to that.
And very fittingly, it's to do with health.
So you thought it was going to be more like the Gimlet podcast startup?
Yes. I was like, at the start of this, she's just like dropped out of uni and she's going to start building this, you know, this great company. For it to have a book written about it, something must have gone something must have been really impactful as a result. And it certainly was.
It's a cautionary tale.
Yeah. It's not a positive tale. Very good podcast, by the way.
Very good. Season 1 in particular.
Yeah. See, I've only listened to season 1.
So season 3, I think, is also really good. It's about the American Apparel founder, and it is again a really interesting cautionary tale in that season 2. But they produce really good podcasts.
Yeah.
But season 1's about how they Gimlet,
which is the podcast.
Which is the company that makes the podcast. So excellent. Give it a go.
Yeah. And on the topic of, I guess, health, which is what what the whole book is centered around. Is this a blue pill or a red pill, Lockie?
This is a red pill, which is the new podcast terminology for eye-opening moments.
Yeah, definitely an eye-opener.
Stole it from The Matrix.
Yes.
Obviously.
And verified that it was the red pill.
Yeah. So some research from you during the week. Thank you for that. And today we're wearing some headphones.
we've stepped up to the next level, so we can actually tweak the levels throughout the session,
which is really different.
And realise that my voice is far too loud.
And for those of you not watching, I'm wearing the closest thing I can find to a turtleneck, which is for Elizabeth Holmes, the topic of this book. She enjoyed a turtleneck, so it's actually a rain jacket zipped right up. But I feel like I'm in character. So
it is very Elizabeth-esque. That standard black contrast shot that she has. Is it red lipstick as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's blue eyes, blonde hair.
That's it.
Deep voice. But we'll get into that a bit more as we go along.
So John Carreyrou, who wrote this book, he has a bit of a history in investigative journalism, particularly around health. And he started his professional career out in the Wall Street Journal, I think over in Brussels. And, I think that was in 1999. And then within 4 years, by 2003, he had already become the chief for Southern Europe.
Very successful.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously, the Wall Street Journal, a New York-based company, he was then asked to move across to New York and became the chief for the Health and Science Bureau at the Wall Street Journal, I believe, sort of globally, from a global perspective. And that's led him down the path which eventuated in this book itself being released.
So, look, I guess we decided to...
Sorry, I'm dying.
That's okay.
Dying.
Have a drink. We actually decided to really focus our bio, kind of like the Total Recall, on the actual subject of the book rather than John. So there's just a little small thing about him there. He's a very successful investigative journalist, and he's written this fantastic book. So
yeah, I think there is one really important thing to highlight is that he has had 2 Pulitzer Prizes, and I believe one of them was for Medicare Unmasked, which was a big investigation which came out in I think around 2015 around the Medicare scheme that had been rolled out in the States, and basically all of these inherent issues within the framework that had been developed as part of the rollout, basically leading various medical agencies and all across the entire suite of offerings within the medical realm, basically towards the likes of crony capitalism and the well and truly getting away from the mantra of do no harm, became sort of uncoupled from it because of the incentive-based system that was set up. A system that was intended for good purpose, but unfortunately came off not as well as intended.
Wow.
Things like who we are going to admit into this hospital, depending on what their need is, depending on how much funding we get for that particular type of service. So we'll do more heart surgery because we get more money for heart surgery, but all the people that need lung transplants, sorry, stay at the door.
And that's an interesting part to even this book, is that you're dealing with people's health when you're doing this stuff. It's serious business.
Yeah, there's it puts them on another tier when it's health and well-being. It's people's lives that can be made or broken as a result of this.
What could be more serious?
Yeah.
And ethics is massive. So we'll take you on the narrative of the book and talk about what we took from it as well. And we'll give you enough that you want to go read it. Let's put it that way. So Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born Feb 3rd, 1984. So she's 2 years older than me, and a little bit more than yourself. But still,
you're an old man.
Thanks. But still pretty young, even now, if you think about it. She was born in Washington, D.C. to a stable middle upper class family, I'd describe it as. Her family history had some status and wealth, but it never made it quite down to her family. But both her parents worked in government at different stages of their career, and her mum, Noelle Ann Doust, was original name, and her father, Christian Rasmus Holmes IV. Now there's
some prestige there.
That is a serious name.
I just didn't think that still was a thing.
In America, it is. There's a golfer who's got a name like that. It must still be a thing in certain parts of America. I don't know. You don't hear that here.
No.
You don't even really hear Junior that much, do you?
No. I guess that is
Gary
another.
Ablett Jr., that's about it.
Yeah. It's not a very common thing.
No.
Yeah. I think maybe, are we a little bit simpler? Is that what it is, Lockie?
I don't know. We're trying to rebel against the
norms of prestige.
Exactly. So pretty normal childhood. She had a bit of trouble fitting in her teens, but she was schooled in the DC area. They moved to Houston, Texas. Her father had worked there at a certain point, and then moved back to DC. And when she was asked at age 7 what you want to be, she replied, "I want to be a billionaire." And it wasn't, according to the family member who tells this story in the book, it didn't seem like a joke.
What did you want to be when you were 7?
I think there's a story of me being asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, when I was like 12 or something. I said, a paleontologist. And my uncle's like, what the fuck is that? I like dinosaurs. So
where were you inspired by that?
I don't know. I think you just kind of hook onto something as a kid. Dinosaurs are pretty cool.
Is it like Jurassic Park?
Yeah, that maybe it's probably around that, But this actually
it could have been it was like the series of like Jurassic Park, The Mummy. They're all around like archaeology and.
But I didn't end up following that through, surprisingly.
Hey mate, there's always time.
Yeah, never say never. But like discovering dinosaurs is pretty cool. Like they weren't that well known that these beasts existed until relatively recently. At least in well documented. And then people started finding these massive skulls and stuff.
I've got no
idea. That's amazing, isn't it? Like,
when do you know when the? I'm sure they were like
hand
encountered.
up here.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but they weren't like well documented, so I'm sure they found them all throughout human history. Obviously, they must have, But I think they found the first one that's like well known. I think it was in Scotland. I'm putting my hand up here. This is a guess from memory.
Loch Ness Monster.
Perhaps. And then they're like, holy shit, what's this? It's what an amazing discovery. And I didn't know till recently that there are a huge amount of giant animals in Australia too. Massive kangaroos and weird animals.
Yeah, we had kangaroos, massive, so we've got kangaroos now. There was giant kangaroos.
Yeah.
Basically all the marsupials
and supersized
Australian animals that existed on like a gigantic scale. There was big crocodiles as well.
How scary is that?
Yeah, massively scary.
I reckon the sea dinosaurs are the scary ones.
The sea dinosaurs.
Like, the giant teeth sea monsters. That freaks me out.
There's the Universal Studios theme park over in the States. I haven't been there, but I've seen the roller coaster ride, and I've got a friend that's over there at the moment, and you're riding through and you see it's like a big sea-dwelling Tyrannosaurus Rex, basically. So think of a Tyrannosaurus Rex in like a snake. In fact, think of a Tyrannosaurus Rex without the legs, without the arms. Just strange.
Freaky. So how's this for a childhood hobby? She would play Monopoly.
Oh, actually,
Okay.
before you go on, do you know?
Is this dinosaur related? I hope so.
It's gigantic
Okay.
Australian marsupial related.
Oh, I'm in.
When they disappeared, just so happens to coincide around the time that humans made it to Australia.
Not that surprising. We've been killing things for a long time, haven't we?
I didn't draw the conclusion, but I'm just putting it out there. I think I'm trying to work out when it was, but it was, obviously thousands and thousands of years ago.
Similar thing in North America.
Correct.
It kind of tells me that we're not that different. Well, we aren't. We're all the same.
I suspect if
biologically, aren't we? Right.
I suspect if those things were running around the streets of Melbourne, gigantic crocodiles and emus, I don't suspect they'd be around for too long. But there'll be a few hold up in the zoo.
We haven't evolved. We're the same people. We've just got a bunch of stuff that people before us invented.
Yep.
And that is we've been destroying the environment for a long time.
We've got all this technology that we don't know how to use or what to do with it.
Well, that's cool. So about Monopoly, she would play it with her cousins on vacations. She'd almost always win. She'd play to the end, making sure she took every last property off the other cousins. And if she did lose, she'd storm off in a half. Very, very determined young lady. She had an interest in computer programming and, again, kind of struggled to fit in the latter years of high school and had a few issues, but she got it all together academically and would study all night and became a straight A student towards the end of high school. And she was very entrepreneurial, and she claims that she started her first company selling C++ compilers, something to do with computer code, to the Chinese, because her father made her learn Mandarin because he'd done some business there and probably saw the future. And the truth of that is a little murky. It might be part of the myth that is Elizabeth Holmes. We're not quite sure. But she made it into Stanford and kind of followed along that path of what a lot of entrepreneurs have. Got into Stanford and dropped out midway through her degree. And she was studying chemical engineering. And some interesting things happened while she was at uni, but she was always kind of thinking of new things. And while she was at Stanford, she worked at the laboratory called the Genome Institute of Singapore, did a bit of overseas stuff, and which tested for severe acute respiratory syndrome. And post that, she filed her first patent, which was the application for a wearable drug delivery patch. And this later evolved into what she ended up doing at her company called Theranos.
The book. And this is
so that, just for clarity, that's what the book centers around, is her journey creating this business and where it all leads to.
Yeah, and it really does start from the outset, which is what got me so pumped up at the start listening to this book, because it takes you from the humble beginnings all the way through to the magnificent finish.
So she really started to have an interest in healthcare, and she ended up, I guess, funding a company that called Real Time Cures in Palo Alto. And the mission of that business was to democratize healthcare, she said. She sought to perform blood tests using only small amounts of blood. And that's what she had a real fear of needles and would faint at the sight of too much blood.
Yeah, so that was like the instigator.
So that was her motivation. And that started in the patch. That's correct.
Which is really interesting. Like, she has this like clearly deep fear of needles and getting injections. So she wants to solve it. She wants to create this
She wants to change the world.
Yeah, create this patch.
Help people.
That's, you stick on the skin and it's able to draw out all the blood work that it needs to in order to be able to read what different levels of things are in your body and give you some sort of meaningful analysis of that.
Yeah, so that proved to be very, very difficult, even conceptually. So the idea kind of morphed or pivoted, or whatever you want to call it, into this idea to get vast amounts of data from a few droplets of blood derived from the tip of your finger. She pitched this to Phyllis Gardner at Stanford, who was one of her advisors, and she said, well, look, I don't think that's possible. And
what did she say to that?
Well, I'll get to that. Explained it was impossible to do what Holmes said was claiming to be done, and several other experts told her the same thing. But she didn't take no for an answer. And she didn't relent. She was absolutely determined, and, impossible is only a word, this sort of attitude that is pervasive through Silicon Valley. And as we're kind of explaining this journey, it's important to think about it I believe, in a way that you think about it as if you didn't know the outcome, which is, we've already alluded to, problematic. And think about, is it that different to some of the other stories you hear around about some of these other companies that start up? Because that, to me, is one of the really interesting takeaways from this book.
Yeah. If this was a great outcome, or if
how would you be feeling about the way that we're talking? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off there, mate.
Yeah. And so, what if the outcome ended up changing the entire world and the way in which we do things? How would we perceive the outcome from what's been done? And that's kind of like the crux of where we want to take this. Which,
by the sounds of it, is how you were kind of listening to it, which would have been really interesting, having not had that full context of what it's about in the first place.
Yeah, particularly not having the subtitle to the book.
Yeah. So there's a corresponding HBO documentary about her, which I think's much inferior to the book, but it's really interesting to watch it after you've read the book, because you get to see her visually in action, and they talk about a couple of other interesting aspects that probably aren't. It's more of an analysis of what happened to her with her.
So she gets this company launched, which is kind of the initiation for the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then what unfolds from there, Lockie?
So she launches this company. She's able to convince her dean at the School of Engineering, Channing Robertson, that this is actually a great idea. And there's a quote from him. He was impressed by her inventiveness. She was able to somehow synthesize these pieces of science, engineering, and technology that I'd never thought of before. I'd never encountered a student like this before, of the then thousands of students that I'd talked to.
Interesting.
So she is a very brilliant person, able to, she's clearly talented.
But so much so that she's able to convince, the dean
of the School of Engineering
that that these few different things can fit together in a way that hasn't been thought of, and make some sort of technology possible that doesn't exist.
He said, follow your dreams, and he became the first board member. So that's the effect that she had on him. Yeah.
Yeah. So he set her on the sort of the path.
Yeah.
Or continued her on the path.
So replace Elizabeth Holmes with Steve Jobs as a name. That is inspiring already. I'm like, where take my money? The name of the company got changed to Theranos, and it was properly incorporated in April 2004. So pretty recent. And Robertson began introducing Elizabeth to venture capitalists. So she was able to tap family connections too at the start and got some good funding from some credible sources. Not really through, the product as such, but more, who she was talking to. She did pitch a lot of the people that Robertson introduced her to, and some of them bit, and they often say that venture capitalists really want to invest in the person rather than the idea. But it's slightly more, by the sounds of it, from my research, it's slightly more analysed in medtech because it is so technical, and that's the road she was going down. But a lot of the times they'll just throw money at someone who kind of fits a profile.
Yeah.
Because it's a positive black swan game.
Yeah, it's fine. It's finding a realistic and working business model with the right founder that fits that model, with something that actually fits the market. And then once you've kind of got that combination sorted out, that's where they will invest, So it's about selling yourself as the founder. And if you can back it up with understanding that you've got this sort of business model here that will do something and that there's a need for it,
you're away.
And then you just got to be able to sell the sell.
So,
and could she ever?
Well, she could, but not everyone bought the pitch because her pitch was light on technical detail and high on rhetoric. So she wanted to change the world, and she talked a lot about saving lives. And she was very charismatic. But when they dug in a bit deeper, not everyone bought this pitch. And when the meetings turned bad, they turned really bad. And she wouldn't be able to answer the questions, and often she'd get up and leave in a huff.
Classic talking platitudes.
Yeah.
Big platitudes.
A good story. But she was 19 or approximately, like, pretty young at the time, right? So
I was still trying to work out how to speak at 19. I still am.
So even if she's, she cruises through, and even when she's 20, 22, that's so young. It's an amazing story for her to even get this far and have that kind of determination at this point. So, but she gets enough money to get her going.
Yeah, because she's what she's trying to do is she's trying to have something which go from the hypodermic needle, which is like sucks out tons of blood.
Like the blood test you get.
Standard blood test.
Yep.
You've got all the little vacuum capsules that are sucking out your blood. And you might, if you want to get an array of tests done, you might have to get 10 different capsules filled up. She wants to take that from that to a little pinprick on like the finger, and there's the patch which reads whatever comes off the back of that. No, this is post patch, isn't it? So,
correct. So it fits in a little cartridge.
Yep.
You put it into a machine which she built. The people she hired with the capital that she raised built this little prototype and named it the Edison. And you'd just put this chip in the box, and voila, you'd have these test results that would tell you. And it would be incredibly revolutionary if that were to happen, because a lot of people have to have significant amount of blood tests. It's incredibly draining and problematic to find veins in sick people, etc. It really would change the world and improve the lives of a lot of people.
Yeah, but you're going from something with like such a high volume of blood to like nothing, and and the intent was to provide more tests and more outcomes and more diagnosis than what all of these capsules of blood were going to do in the first place. So.
Yeah, and it turns out that's an incredibly difficult engineering challenge for a number of medical reasons. And so this prototype that they constructed was really more a mock-up of what Elizabeth had in mind, but it looked kind of nice. But one of the real issues is that blood needs to be diluted for many different types of tests, because a lot of it's the way they test the blood, having it needs to be diluted so that light can pass through it and other things. So when you take such a small amount of blood to then dilute that small amount of blood and perform all these tests on it is, well, basically impossible at that time. So
yeah, well, it does like one window of tests, and then you got to use some more of the blood in another way for different types of tests.
And this is stuff that fills up an entire room, these machines that do this, and it's going to be made into the same size as a desktop computer, basically.
Yeah. We've seen pathology labs. They're just chockers full of testing equipment and computers and all different, and then tons and tons of blood work that's going on.
Yeah. But she builds this prototype with a lot of help from obviously the engineers. She's an incredibly hard worker. She sleeps at the office. She in uni, when she actually founded this business, she told her boyfriend at the time, we have to break up because I'm going to start a company and I won't have time for you. So she was fully committed to this.
Not committed to him.
No, not at all. He went to the wayside. So, but her level of devotion was giving everything to this, and she's a very bright person.
So it's something about having a vision, like
definitely.
You find a vision, you align yourself to that, and you can be on you get a lot of energy from that, a lot of charge from it, and particularly someone who was driven at the age of 7 to smash all of her friends and family in a game just because she was on a mission to do it, to be a billionaire. It's amazing.
So her first capital raising, she raised $6 million, which really got her going. But by 2010, she'd raised $92 million in another round. So the value of the company was really going up over that period, and she quickly built staff members and started scaling and really moving fast and trying to get contracts with, say, government agencies like the Army, getting testing with Pfizer for certain different types of testing that she could use her product on, but the prototype barely worked. So, and the way that she ran the company internally as she scaled up was really interesting. So she effectively there was a high turnover rate at the company, but it was kind of masked by the rapid growth and the chaos of a startup, But she was an incredible salesperson and was able to had a particularly strong effect on kind of older age men. Yeah, and it was almost like they saw her as a daughter or something, because she was able to convince these people to give her incredible amounts of money with what seems like very little detail. So we'll dive into the internals of the company, but also kind of in a second, but also kind of the way she's able to build the reputation of this business.
But it's kind of like the that classic, once you've got $90 million capital raising rounds going for a company, it generates hype, and there's the classic...
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, and there's the classic fear of missing out. Like as soon as you've got a couple of people with a little bit of credibility, you've got the dean as one of the chairs, credibility's sort of built. You've raised some money already, more credibility's built, and you've got people investing. It's kind of this self-fulfilling continuation. And if she's able to clearly sell something which doesn't exist already, on the idea, which is not an uncommon thing either.
No, that's kind of what investing is in some ways.
But obviously without also the backing due diligence But
it was kind of beyond that. She was able to convince them to almost believe in her with a religious fervour.
A cult.
Yeah. So some of the people she ended up having on her board were former Secretary of State George Shultz, and he got to the point where one of the whistleblowers was his grandson. who ended up working there. But George would believe Elizabeth over his own kin, and all that played out later on. But really intense. Henry Kissinger was on her board at one point. David Boyce, who I've found, who features later in this book, is an incredibly high-powered attorney in America. And James Mattis, who was a war hero and a general. These are really impressive people. That all helped legitimise things too.
Yeah, well, as soon as you've got, again, that credibility backing, you've got a story to tell, you know. And it's I was just looking at what it's called, the investor's quandary. You know, it's the classic fear of missing out. Very, very human need.
We all experience it, no doubt.
So, after she ditched her other boyfriend by the wayside, did she find another one?
She did. So she found a boyfriend whose name was Ramesh Balwani, whose nickname was Sunny.
Now, they weren't actually publicised as boyfriend girlfriend though.
So
certainly not in the beginning.
Well, yeah, he kind of sat behind the scenes and they lived together, and he wasn't involved day to day with the company at first. So he was about 20 years her senior and was a successful entrepreneur. But I would argue, reading his history, probably got a bit lucky. But hey, he put himself out there, and he got rich made about 40 million off the initial tech bubble, where he had a business called commerce1.com that didn't really do anything, but was there at the
didn't do anything.
Nah, not really, and was there at the start, floated just before the bubble burst. You know, it was one of those classic things where people were just buying this stuff, you know, and he just timed it beautifully. But he had the guts to go out there and do something, so respect. But he wasn't a very nice person, which we'll find out. And this confirmed his massive ego that he was basically a business genius. Would drive around in Lamborghinis, really showy sort of guy who, kind of met Elizabeth and they, were partners. But it was a very kind of described as a very kind of business-like. There wasn't a lot of affection there. It was it was kind of a strange relationship to those who saw it.
Yeah, but was there any affection there in terms of any of those relationships that maybe were seen to be had with Elizabeth? It's kind of telling what you're talking about before, you know, the sort of the fatherly figures of these senior board members and senior investors coming in. There's kind of
hard to know.
There.
Yeah, it's not normal, but it's hard to comment on that without being a psychologist probably. But she certainly had a pull over people, and even the employees too. It wasn't just old guys. Like, people came to work for her because she was such a charismatic person. So, he became involved in the company though. He did. Yeah. So after a lot of turnover, he came in as the COO and was just incredibly brutal.
Ruthless.
Oh, unbelievably. So it's probably important to kind of outline a couple of things about the internal machinations of the company too. Is that she was a massive fan of Steve Jobs, hence my turtleneck today, because she would...
But her turtleneck too.
She kind of transformed herself to like a geeky kind of dressing, person, and she got a transformation from, it's raining here. She got a transformation from that and started dressing really sleek like Steve. She actually had an interesting thing where she had a really deep baritone voice. And if you look up some of the interviews with her, it's striking, her voice. You don't expect it from her stature.
It like knocks you back. You're like, whoa, wasn't expecting that.
And some of the way she talks in some of her speeches, it's almost hypnotic. The tone and the rhythm of it.
Well, it's like strikes you at first, so you're like kind of engaged. You're kind of into the conversation with her, and then takes you on this like just sort of calm journey, and getting you excited about her product. And you can definitely see that sort of sales skill that is just inherent to her nature.
So he, as in Steve Jobs, had a big effect on her way of operating. You know, he had a famous reality distortion field where he said, I want a mouse that moves around without a ball in it. Make it, you know, or...
No, I want a mouse.
Yeah,
Full
sorry.
stop.
I want a mouse, yeah. And I want it tomorrow, and he'd scare people and say, like, you can do it, you know.
What's a mouse? Like, you know,
and
can you imagine a mouse without a mouse existing?
Yeah. So
as we know it today.
And then he'd kind of bully / inspire some combination of the two, these brilliant engineers to make these things. But he kind of pushed them just beyond their limits, and she saw that and tried to embody that herself. So, for example, she would refuse to use any more blood than a tiny droplet of, you know, tiny vial of blood, even though that would have significantly made it much easier for the engineers to actually invent something that worked.
Well, it's not the story that they were selling. You know, she set the sort of minimum viable product at kind of the ultimate product. In reality, like she refused to give concessions, probably on an exaggerated version of what she was probably inspired by from Steve Jobs. I actually watched the other day. It was, I think, Steve coming back into Apple. You know, post
Next,
and then being invited to come back in after Apple were going down the gurgler, and the initial launch of the new ad campaign, and it was amazing. It was such a great conversation. You know, he rolls into this room of I'm not sure whether it was investors and or just general public members or company members. But he just tells his story. He comes out in shorts. He's got like Birkenstocks on, and just tells his story of the journey they've been on for the last, 13 weeks. And it was the launch of the
iMac.
No, it was the ad campaign to start shifting the brand name of
Gotcha.
Apple, and it was the famous one that had all of the really notable people from history, where they had to go back into the various estates of those individuals. So Muhammad Ali had an ad campaign. It was just literally him, in one of his poses, and it had like the motto, which I can't recall at the moment. It's
Think different.
Think different. That was it. That's it. And had all of the these great characters and people throughout time, and just completely started shifting Apple towards the brand from being this, more corporate centered technology company, because it was tending towards what I guess IBM probably was at the time, and then
more aspiration,
and shifted it towards being a vision for different people and exciting creativity.
It's very bold, isn't it?
Super bold, particularly at the time. Like,
yeah,
that's an edgy ad for when that was.
So apparently Walter Isaacson wrote the biography for Steve Jobs, as many people will know, and we'll have to do that one here one day. But apparently the employees could tell which chapter she was up to in that, because she'd come in and use the management techniques that she was reading. But this is not an unusual kind of thing to like make yourself, and it's probably something you can use, to be honest. It's kind of make yourself embody the person or where you want to get to. Like, that's kind of like a famous, like Jack Welch thing, or it was on 30 Rock, dress like the person the next rung up. Because people say, oh, you dress like that, you must be like that. It kind of helps create that story.
Oh, it's a classic. It's a classic. Like, it's what we do. Is we, as much as we maybe don't like to do it, or as much as we talk about we don't like to do it, we stereotype. We stereotype for like to make things easy for us. And so when you've got a stereotypical image of, a visionary, and then you see someone else that's kind of looks the same as that visionary. You're like, must be a visionary.
So interestingly, Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, who was ousted from Twitter for being an absolute terrible CEO early days, but then is a legitimate executive. Like he's started another business, Square, which is incredibly successful, and he came back to Twitter and took over from Evan. He used a very similar tactic, that he started dressing like Steve, would use similar, words and phrases and that sort of thing, and would actually perpetuate that in the media and became known as a bit of a genius CEO, which helped him then take Twitter back over. And, to now, as far as I know, he delivers, but he used that same tactic to get there.
Yeah, to frame the image of himself.
That's a great way of putting it.
But and now to where Twitter's gotten to, this is just they're in this really interesting space now, because it's got this ability to kind of shape. It's got at the moment, there's the real contentious issue around Twitter and the freedom of speech problem, or is it a problem that's going on Twitter? And, because they have the policy of, not being able to ever edit a post, which is great, because it's kind of like there's a checkpoint in time where you've said something and that's there until you decide you delete it. There's no way that you can go back and tweet what you said and how you said it, which is great, because it's like this live feed of
it's really interesting, Twitter.
People. Yeah. But because of the policies and because of how big it is and how much action and influence it has, and as a result of all of that, the power that it has to shape society, there's a real potential problem with the policies that the company has around what can and cannot be said on Twitter that is causing a bit of a debacle at the moment.
There'd be another mini episode in that for us.
And how you how he needs to think about that. And so it's a challenging problem that Jack Dorsey is obviously going through with his team, and but obviously incredible job for him to go from getting ousted to coming back in and creating this mammoth thing that it is now, and just dealing with some of these big societal issues. Yeah. It's amazing.
So number one thing at their company was secrecy. That was the number one valued thing, and loyalty. So, but I think the secrecy is the interesting one. So she kept everyone siloed from one another. So part of the engineering team would know one thing, the other part of the engineering team would be working on another part of the box, and it was kind of set up so they couldn't really work together that easily. Everything was routed through her, and then eventually through Sunny too.
This is like the Area 51 thing, mate.
It's
very topical conversation at the moment.
You couldn't even direct message people from different departments. You were really cut off. So this created probably, I kind of boiled it down to what I think is three things. First thing was the secrecy it made it impossible to really move forward properly on this project. So she's selling the hype of this business, what it might be able to do, etc. But the internal secrecy and the setup and the privacy focus over collaboration meant that they could never properly, they're always hamstrung in moving forward to try and solve a really difficult technical issue. And that caused the actual development of the product to significantly lag behind her selling it to the market, to the point where it kind of never caught up. The second was it made
so why was the secrecy there though? So this, why was the secrecy in place?
That's a really tough question.
Because
if I took a stab at it, it might be initially because of confidence. Might have been a confidence thing, or like a not really knowing. Everything has to run through me sort of stuff, or a little bit of imposter syndrome might have caused that at the very, very start. But then it quickly became they were really kind of making up what this box could do. And so they kind of had to keep everyone separate.
Correct. It was like a more than
I'm not sure it started like that.
But the technology was never there, right?
No.
And so by the time it became a company sizable enough to go, right, we start putting up walls between, whether real or artificial, walls between different departments. The reason they're doing that is so that nothing escapes.
Correct.
Nothing can really get out. No one can piece the entire story together except for those who are in the know. And those who are in the know is Elizabeth.
That's right. So that was my second point of the 3 impacts. The truth about the product could be kept hidden. If you don't know the whole story, it's very hard to expose it or link it all together. And she's out there saying we're changing the world, this sort of stuff. You can kind of believe that. And there's some more nuance to that we'll go into. It's really interesting. But the third and important and equally important is it made the product seem like she had something worth hiding.
Correct.
So simultaneously it killed the ability to actually make it, but it also made it more desirable for those outside of the business and easy for her to sell. Because if you're keeping something that secret, geez, it must be good. Well, we can't show you the lab at the moment. It's top secret.
It's like the ultimate bluff. You're hanging onto the cards. No one can see the cards, and you're just playing them hard on the table.
It's enticing. You're like, I want to see this thing. It's,
but nothing to show for it, and completely destroys productivity. Like the lack of collaboration, like that.
So Sonny there was a saying about what Sonny did, and it was called disappearing people. Like a mob hit. So you'd get pissed off at someone or says they were not working hard enough or you're not working on the weekend, devotion to the cause and secrecy.
As you said, Elizabeth was sleeping under her desk, which meant that everyone else needed to be sleeping under their desks in order to be working hard enough.
Yep.
That was kind of where the bar was set.
And he'd just fire you on a whim. And security would grab your stuff. Sometimes you wouldn't even get to grab your stuff. You'd just get escorted out of the building. Or your emails. And they'd threaten to sue you if you emailed anything outside the company and all this sort of paranoia.
But before you're escorted out, there's one thing that they let you do. And that's sign your name on the bottom of some ludicrous non-disclosure agreement that's been put together to say that you're never going to say anything and never going to share any more details beyond all the previous non-disclosure agreements that you've already put together. And that wasn't just put together by, them or some rookie. That was put together by one of their board members. And this is where it really gets interesting, because one of their board members is the key legal advisor and lawyer for the company, which is the David Boyce, as you mentioned before.
Really interesting, because that's a great segue into the company kind of crescendoed in 2014 and it raised an additional $700 million in venture capital. The company was valued at $10 billion at that point. Mm. So that's a lot of money to wield around with lawyers, isn't it? And to protect your reputation. But at some point she had to start selling things. So she got some deals with Safeway and Walgreens, which is a chemist or pharmacy outlet in America, and they had massive FOMO. And she wooed a couple of key older men in their ranks who she'd report directly to, and was able to actually ended up rolling these things out in these places, and people were getting blood tests from them but they'd just be wrong, way outside the margins of acceptable error. They'd take the blood, send it back to the lab in-house, which was a disaster, test it on the old machines and send it back to complete fraud.
Yeah,
It
and they had no
effectively,
proper-
it devolved into an absolutely complete fraud.
Yeah, but because of what the company was, they didn't have the proper sort of chains of custody and different things that needed to go on in order to make that happen. Even just doing it in the conventional sense, which is all that they were doing, is what was conventionally available anyway in these stores when they actually started producing results for people. They didn't have the right systems in place to implement it properly. So they weren't providing the actual product that had been sold. They also weren't delivering on a product which already existed, because that's what they were using. They just took another company's product, slotted it in there instead of theirs, and used that as the technology for the basis of doing all this work.
And they couldn't even do that properly.
Yeah, and people were like getting these hyperbaric needles still in their arm. They're like, wasn't the point of this to have a pinprick?
Yeah. So
Sorry, I think they had the pinprick and
and
they
that.
had, and
So
then
they got
had
the
hyper-
double. So they got 2 jabs. It's even worse.
It's like the pinprick does 99% of the test, but we just need this hyperbaric needle just to get a couple of others.
So there's all sorts of crazy stories in the book, but they became progressively more paranoid and committed way more fraud, and it just sort of snowballed. So enter John Carreyrou, who started to get tip-offs from ex-employees and a few others. And he started investigating the business quite hard. And it was very hard to do because they'd really tied things up. And it was a darling, this business of Silicon Valley. She's a genius, etc. And this is where David Boyce starts coming after her really hard. So he effectively tries to strong-arm the publication into not selling this story, saying you're revealing trade secrets, you don't understand, this sort of stuff. And they kept strong and they released an article.
Yeah. And the book itself. But this is the Wall Street Journal, right? Which is getting pressured by David Boyce. And,
he's a really powerful person.
Would have put the pressure on. But you imagine this guy really being at the pinnacle of the pressure being applied to the individual employees as they are being made to disappear within the company. Like this guy represented Al Gore in Bush versus Al Gore. He represented the US in US versus Microsoft. He represented, it was for the invalidation of Proposition 8 in California, which was trying to oppose same-sex marriage. Like he's a very high-level influential lawyer.
Someone else she was able to get on side.
But what is so wrong in this situation, right, is that he's a board member. He's a shareholder, heavily invested in the company. So primary method of him getting paid was via equity.
Stock price means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was invested in the outcomes of the company, which means he has like full buy-in. He would put enough pressure on all these individuals to set up this secrecy, which stemmed from the sort of paranoia of Elizabeth and Sonny. So there was never any way of sort of any legal issues happening here.
So
but what I don't get is he seems to have gone from some of these cases with like, they seem quite, positive and socially quite good.
Okay, yeah.
My little understanding of them to this.
But I'm sure he uses this stuff like this to make himself rich. So
true.
You think he'd take corporate clients too. So,
but
he comes across as a pretty pretty ruthless sort of person. But he's immoral.
Yeah, I think ruthless might be okay if he was moral, but he's clearly not moral. That's the issue.
So to wrap this, he the company unravels after October 2015 when the first article comes out, and he follows up with another article. The FDA and regulatory bodies close in and actually start doing stuff instead of dancing around this business. And over a period of 2 years, the company goes to zero. And Elizabeth and Sonny charged the SEC through Theranos for fraud and wire fraud. She was forced to pay $500,000 in fines and was barred from having a leadership position in the company for 10 years. So that's just on the commercial side. But in 2018, Elizabeth and Sonny were charged with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud personally, which carries a maximum prison sentence of around 20 years. So it's yet to be found what the outcome of all that's going to be. Will she do jail time? There's a bit of conjecture around that, and they're still going through that now. So
I think the trial starts next year. Yeah, 2020 they go on trial. Although hasn't Sonny disappeared off the face of the planet? He's gone.
They're no longer together. She's got a new partner.
Yeah. I think he disappeared off the face of the planet when all this sort of went kaboom.
She became a billionaire though for a little while.
Yeah.
So let's dive into this. There's so many themes out of this amazing story. What were your first thoughts when you kind of finished this?
Well, it was more like the plot had been given away by about, my excitement had been quenched by about a third of the way into the book, because I was like, hang on, what is going on here? There's something is totally awry, which I really enjoyed, just how much of a long lead-in time there was before they kind of started to unravel some of the issues in the company. But the biggest thing was just how dumb we are. To be really wholly convinced on something that has no technical credibility.
For 10 years.
No, there is no technical credibility in what this company is doing in a industry that should be purely based on its technical credibility. Which is all well and good, me saying this in hindsight too, by the way, knowing the outcome.
So so that's the message. What do you take away from that? Do you take that as a pessimistic thing or an optimistic thing, that we're really dumb?
I don't think you need to take it optimistically or pessimistically. I think it's the reality, right?
Okay.
So the reality is we're dumb. So have a check and balance in place when you get excited about something that everyone's jumping on board. When you hear about the next Bitcoin that's released and that it's going to change the world, or the next startup company to invest in, or the next share stock that, everyone's investing in that's imposed on the news. Maybe just take a couple of seconds just to go, is this really the right choice? Or if something's seen, and the other
what
piece.
What story am I being told here?
But the other piece is too, there is none of this sort of get rich quick business. It really doesn't exist. Sure, there's Tats Lotto, but what's the chances of winning Tats Lotto? I've got a better chance of getting struck by lightning in this rain that we're going through at the moment.
And we're inside. So to me, I took an interesting point from what you just said. I kind of thought that gives me hope, because I think everyone has self-doubt about how smart they are, right? I mean, I do. But these people aren't any smarter than me. And they're out there doing crazy stuff, not good stuff, but the people who are in the high levels, yeah, they're smart, but they're still human, and we can all do things we can get to high places if that's what we want, because we're not that different from those people. Don't put them on a pedestal, Brings them back to earth a little bit for me.
Well, I think it highlights just.
And I'm not necessarily talking about Elizabeth for clarity there. I'm more talking about everyone who got swept up in this.
Yeah. I think it places an emphasis on how important it is that if you're trying to do a good thing, that you need to have having a good story behind it will mean that it will be able to get there. It will help it really, really get there. You know, it certainly doesn't take away from the hard work and the luck that's needed, but there is definitely something in that. The other really interesting thing for me coming out of this is there ended up being, you know, you've got this $10 billion valuation of this company, Elizabeth, you know, having a net worth of $5 billion by the pinnacle of where the company was at, with nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
Like, there is something inherently wrong, like beyond just the ignorance piece. There is something inherently wrong in the sort of structure and the governance that exists in enabling that to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
And it's super interesting that some of the people on her board were some of the people with some of the highest governance positions in the world.
Yeah. And also, you know, being paid in equity and also doing services for the company and all these sort of real ethical and independence issues going on in that sort of...
It's cronyism, yeah.
Yeah, crony capitalism. Yeah, absolutely.
So a couple of things for me were just the power of the story you tell yourself. What bad things are you willing to do in the name of a good thing? That was a big thing for me, is that I don't believe Elizabeth and the people who worked there and who compromised their integrity and did unethical things with the blood testing and her lying and this sort of stuff. I don't think that she thought, or still does, thinks that she's a bad person. Maybe that's a wrong way to put it. A good or bad person's kind of not the right way to say that. It's more around, she felt she was doing a good thing, and this was in the cause of, and most people in the world, bad stuff that happens, they themselves believe they're doing a good thing when they're doing it. Mm. Because they believe in some cause. Like hers was, I'll fake it till I make it, Silicon Valley cult style, you know, try and push things to the limit. Yeah, I'll have to break a few rules with these regulators, and I'll have to fake a few tests, but we'll get there. We'll build this product and it'll change the world and it'll bring benefits to so many different people. And you could argue that that's a similar philosophy to, you know, religious extremism. People think they're doing, in their mind, for the greater good, whatever they believe in, they do really terrible things.
It's kind of like, where's the line drawn? You know, and I think the crux of it is when it's a blatant lie, and when people are going, it's a blatant lie and there is some serious harm that is going to result. You know, it's going to be net harm as a result of this. That's where we've got an issue. It's
an interesting ethical question because, you know, would you kill one to save 1,000? That sort of thing. And yeah, look, I think it's naive to think that I'm any different to that.
Yeah.
And one of the takeaways for me is, what bad things do I do because of a story I tell myself about doing good? So,
well, I guess the $10 billion question is, right, if, say, for example, 5 years down the track from, you know, when all this came out in 2015 or whatever it was, say in 2020, next year, they were actually looking to release a product that was pretty damn close to what they set out to do. Mm. And they had all these, you know, improper diagnosis of people along the way, because that's what was happening. People were getting incorrectly diagnosed for particular conditions, and some weren't getting diagnosed for conditions that they did have. And if you're relying on that, that's that's really detrimental, potentially life-threatening. If that was to be released next year, what would we think then?
Does the ends justify the means? So let me ask you this. What is there a story that you tell yourself for doing something maybe if you were standing in front of it, you wouldn't do? Because part of this as well is she's not there. She's not there with the person getting the result saying they've got prostate cancer, and that person making life decisions based off that only to have for this incorrect diagnosis. So you're removed from that. So
it's kind of like, what are you removed from the emotional?
Well, if it's not right in front of you, like I can think for myself. So if I'm shopping at Kmart, I'm almost certainly not to offend Kmart, but
I was about to ask, is this a plug for Kmart or not a plug for Kmart?
If a shirt costs $1, who made that? And I find this really interesting. Take Apple for an example. Around my area, there's a lot of it's more of like a left sort of area that there a lot of people you see are walking around with Apple computers, that they got made in, no doubt, people make those in pretty tough conditions overseas, That's pretty much, or at least in the past, was well known. Maybe they've cleaned it up, but it's that when you're removed, if I go next door and buy the cheap packet of meat, what conditions was that? I make those decisions all the time. So what story am I telling myself that allows me to do that? If I was in front of the person in Bangladesh making me that shirt, would I buy it? Probably not.
And not just in front of them. If you followed them around for a day and saw the way in which they live, would you buy that shirt?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe I would. Maybe it's probably not that simple, but I think we all make certain compromises on a lesser scale to what she did. And maybe that's my takeaway from this is like, hey, what am I doing that I'm telling myself to make myself feel better that I probably should have another look at?
Yeah. And we're kind of at this taking the sort of developing country perspective. We're kind of now at this inflection point, or we need to be at some sort of inflection point around environmental sustainability. So around the climate change that's happening, and making the first world developed countries are now at this point of saying we need to tackle this globally, this issue globally. We need to put a price on carbon or whatever the proposed means is. No more coal-fired power plants. But then the natural reaction of the developing countries is to go, well, hang on. You guys have been through the full economic development. You guys have brought all of your people out of poverty into where it is, although there's other issues like that in the States where there's actually been a reduction in income, but we won't talk about that. And they have a right to say, why shouldn't we be, able to produce for our economy off this cheap source of power, just as you guys have in the past. And I guess on the sort of longer vision of that is, well, the answer is because there won't be a fucking world for us to live in.
We'll all be dead.
We'll all be dead.
But the answer to that might be to redistribute some wealth across nations, which is never going to happen. But isn't that interesting if you take the whole world as a global community as opposed to thinking about who's in the 1% in the country you're in? I think the stats, if you earn over 30,000, you're in the 1%.
Interesting, mate.
and it's about perspective, isn't it? I'm not sure I have the answers to all this, but there's a lot of ethical thoughts that come from this bloody company. One thing I wanted to say was that something happened in this business that I've experienced when I worked for another company that I called cabin fever. And we once upon a time worked in construction sites. And you are on these projects. This company was going really badly, a lot of turnover at the top, super amount of instability, but everyone was siloed on geographically because they're on different projects, working in site sheds. And the paranoia and the rhetoric that would go around, and who's talking to who's next on the chopping block, who's talking badly about me, all this stuff gets amplified because you're super disconnected and it's an echo chamber. And that definitely happened at this business as well. And it's really uncomfortable and it causes you to be quite paranoid.
Was it impactful down to the site? Was it impactful down to the people present on site, the management on site?
Definitely, yeah, 100%. Like I remember I took half a day off to play golf with one of the managers. And which, arguably probably not a great thing to do, but it was fun. And
was this annual leave or was this
no
a sick day?
And it became this thing, where were you? People were calling us and there was all these rumors, and then we're just like, hey, we went and played golf. But it was this massive deal, and we almost felt like we had to hide it or something. It was just a really odd time and atmosphere, and it kind of, everything becomes a big deal. And so I've kind of thought about that, and you wonder where you're getting your information from. You don't really know what's true from what's happening in the business or those sort of things, and it really affects. You're on high alert all the time and you interpret meaning into things that have no meaning.
The story I'm telling myself.
That's awesome, yeah.
Okay.
I'll use that. Thank you.
If that's the takeaway, it's that you will start to use that. And it's really, this is actually stealing big time from Brené Brown's research, who we will also jump into at some point in time. But people who use that particular phrase actually talking to other people when they've misinterpreted something that is going on because of what they've said or because of the rumors that are getting spread around or whatever the interaction was, really helps people get to the truth and is so much better as a result. We can't be informed by these stories that we make up about what is going on to ourselves, particularly when the facts aren't there if the due diligence was done, like in the case of Theranos.
What else did you take from it?
I touched on it before, but gut instinct is so strong and so powerful, right? Whilst we're talking about the story and being influenced by a story and the narrative that is there, there's always this I don't know, it's quite often in these situations, because they happen all the time, right? And some more impactful and of bigger scale than others. Quite often you'll have this gut instinct saying, is this really the right thing, or this seems too good to be true?
Should I be doing this? Should I make this compromise? Is that what you're alluding to? And also being conned? Yeah,
it's don't be carried away with the romance of
the story.
We're
talking about story a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's because that is what they were doing. They were just selling a story. They were selling a vision.
And if you think about it as well, it's a slow degradation. You don't just walk in one day and go, we're going to con by doing all these bad test results. You get there by a slow atrophy of your ethics. You give up on one thing, then you give up on the next thing. And that's where what you're talking about, the gut, is a really interesting way to put it. So how does this feel? Should I be doing this?
Yeah. And I think there's probably a lot in that. It's like it really is just that pause. And I think that pause is something we don't do enough of. So that's my big takeaway, if anything. And anything for you?
Really cool.
Other than what we've already been
I think
through?
what you said about trusting your gut, the other thing I take away is that you've always got to think about the how big's the downside of what I'm going to do. It's okay to have a really high-paced, iterative, high-failure, let's just take it as it comes, blitzscaling kind of opinion if you're making like photo sharing software. Even that can have damage, but but if you're making a medical device, you've got to be careful about how cavalier you are with that. And that's also relates to risk. But in this case, it really related to the hurt it's going to cause. So I always try and think when I'm starting something or doing something, okay, how do I cap the downside? How can I just have a play with this and see how it goes without risking too much? But you also need to, I think, apply that to, will this have any, ethically, will it have any damage on, what's the downside there too? And they're probably twin pillars of what you should think when you're really trying to do something. So that's my other takeaway.
It's a strong book in like making you think about ethics. I think is kind of just tying that back in from
really
the start.
Good tie in, because I think you've summed it up perfectly.
And it's not just looking at it from the individual to the team, to the bigger group, to the organization, to the state or country or globally as to where we live and what the implications of that can be. Very interesting, and some real governance and ethical issues that we need to resolve, I think, within some of these systems, because for a company like this to get where it got to is kind of, it's gobsmacking.
10 billion. It didn't even have a working model. So really good book. Read it.
Thanks, Lockie.
Thank you. Bye.